Okay, today we're going to be looking at inverse functions. So, the inverse of a function is the function that undoes what f of x has done. So the inverse of a function f of x is the function which undoes what f of x has done. So let's think about, and we write the inverse function as f minus 1 x. So let's look at this. So say we've got the input x and it goes to y. This is f of x. The inverse takes y and puts it back to x. That would be the inverse function. Now there's some really important points that we need to bear in mind. F of the function acting on the inverse function will be is the same as the inverse function acting on the function, which leads us back to x. So you can, it doesn't matter the order. The domain of the inverse function is the range of the function f of x. So the domain of inverse is the range of the function, and the range of the inverse is the domain of f of x. So these are important facts that you need to remember. It's also important to note not every function has an inverse. To find the inverse of a function of some simple one-to-one mappings, you'd already have done that in GCSE. So what we would, let's have a wee reminder. Oh, one other important fact. An inverse function f minus 1x exists if and only if the function is a one-to-one mapping. Okay. So let's look at, have a wee reminder of how to do it. So let's consider function f of x equals 3x minus 1. So here's the steps to find the inverse. Step 1. Write the function as y equals 3x minus 1. So instead of writing f of x, you use y equals whatever the function is. So step 2, interchange the x and y. So now we're going to have x equals 3y minus 1. Step 3, rearrange to make y the subject. So in this case you're going to end up with y equals x plus 1 over 3. So for function f of x equals 3x minus 1, the inverse function is x plus 1 over 3. Another little point to remember to note: if the f and the inverse of function are the same, then f is called a self-inverse function. For example, f of x equals, if f of x equals 1 over x for x not equal to 0, then the inverse is also 1 over x for x not equal to 0. There, it's a self-inverse function. So let's look at some worked examples. So let's consider f of x equals the square root of x plus 2 minus 7 for x belonging to all real numbers, but where x is greater than or equal to minus 2. So firstly we want to find an expression for the inverse. So step 1 was to rewrite this with y equal to x plus 2 minus 7. And now we're going to substitute y in x. So now it's going to be x equals to y plus 2 minus 7. Now we're going to rearrange. So we're going to have x plus 7 equals y plus 2 square root. X plus 7 squared equals y plus 2. And that's going to give us, we put the y over here, as x plus 7 squared minus 2 is going to be the inverse. So f, the inverse function, will be x plus 2 squared minus 2. Now we want to solve for when the inverse function is equal to f of 62. So f of 62. So let's first find out what is f. Oops, 62. So we're going to solve the function for when x is 62. So that's going to be square root of 62 plus 2 minus 7. 62 plus 2 is 64. Is going to be 8 minus 7 is going to be 1. So then we're going to take, so we want to know when is this going to be equal to 1. So x plus 7 squared minus 2 equals 1. So x plus 2 squared equals going to be 3. Now we're just going to take the square root, so that'll be x plus 7 square root of 3, and that'll be a plus or minus. Remember, when you take the square root of a number, it's plus or minus. So x will be, it's going to happen when x is plus or minus square root of 3 minus 7. Now, let's consider the range. The range is when f of x must be greater than or equal to minus 7. So the domain of the inverse is x greater than or equal to minus 7. Now, where did that come from? Let's remember, if x has to be greater or equal to minus 2. So when that's greater or equal to minus 2, this is going to be 0, and f of x is going to be 7. So that'll give us the range. F of x is going to be greater than or equal to minus 7 is going to be the range and of f of x, and we know that for the inverse, the domain of the inverse is the same as the range of the function, so that's where we get this result here. So hence, so let's look at our two solutions. We have x is equal to minus 7 minus the square root of 3, or x is equal to minus 7 plus the square root of 3. So this has to be the only solution because it gives us x greater than or equal to minus 7. It's going to be greater than minus 7, whereas this will be less than minus 7, so this cannot be a result. So the only solution will be when x is minus 7 plus root 3. Let's look at a final example. F of x equal to 5 minus x minus 2 squared for x belonging to all real numbers, and for k less than or equal to x less than or equal to 6. Now, we want to find the smallest value of k for which f has an inverse. So let's consider the function f of x. So, oh, I've not written this properly. Okay. The maximum value must be when x equals 2, because this will turn into 0, and then so that'll be at 2, 5. So let's put this here, 2, 5. And we know, and we want to find out f of 6, which will be 5 minus 6 minus 2 squared, which is going to be minus 11, so down here somewhere. 6 minus 11. And this is quadratic, so it's going to go up and down. Now, for the function to have an inverse, for the function to have an inverse, it must be 1-to-1. So let's look at the shape of this. For it to be 1-to-1, we can only consider this part of this function here. If we were to consider the domain to be below 2, less than 2, then we've got a function that is going to be 1 to many to 1, because it's quadratic. So we need to, it has to have a domain which is going to be just this part here. So therefore k must have the smallest value equal to 2. Okay. For this value of k, find an expression for the inverse function and state the domain and range. So let's do this. So we're going to have y equals 5 minus x minus 2 squared. So it's going to be x equals 5 minus x minus 2 squared. So we'll have x minus 5 equals minus x minus 2 squared. We will rearrange that and we will end up with y equals 2 plus 5 minus x. So the inverse function is going to be 2 plus 5 minus x square rooted. The domain is the same as the range of f of x. So that would be 2 is less than or equal to x is less than or equal to 6. Oh no, that's the domain of f is the range of f. So the range is going to be minus 11 is less than or equal to x less than or equal to 5. And the range will be the domain of f. So the range is 2 less than or equal to x less than or equal to 6. So hope that helps.